The sun-drenched paths of Central Park pulsed with weekend laughter. But for Troy, the world collapsed into a single, cruel echo. Look at these two queers thinking they own the place. The shout from a burly man in a baseball cap ripped through the golden afternoon as his friend howled and pointed straight at Troy and Alexander holding hands. Troy's stomach lurched, old wounds splitting open like fresh cuts. Yet his feet kept moving forward. Face blank, voice locked somewhere deep where no one could reach. Inside, everything screamed. Alexander's palm was warm and steady against his, the only real thing in the storm. But Troy's mind flooded with his father's last words the day he came out. Not my son. The slammed door. The silence that followed for years. Why now? Here. When everything he had built in New York felt so fragile. He had clawed his way to senior architect at one of the city's top firms. Kept his personal life invisible. And still the fear clawed at him, one wrong move and the family money. The career. The fragile piece would vanish. Alexander squeezed his hand harder, whispering, Troy, we don't have to take this. But Troy said nothing, pulling him gently onward, each step a knife twisting between love and survival. The laughter faded behind them, yet it stayed lodged in his chest like a stone he could never cough up. They reached a quiet bench near the lake and sat, Alexander's eyes searching his face with hurt and confusion. You just let them walk all over us, Alexander said softly, voice cracking. Troy stared at the water, the reflection showing two men who loved each other but lived in different worlds. I'm sorry, he finally managed, the words tasting like ash. I can't risk everything right now. My dad still calls once a month pretending I'm straight. My boss made that joke about real men last week. If I snap back, it all unravels. The confession poured out in a rush of internal fire, how every morning he woke up choosing between the man he loved and the son his family still claimed. Alexander leaned closer, frustration bleeding into tenderness. And how long do we keep paying that price? Troy had no answer. The rest of the afternoon blurred into quiet walks and half-spoken thoughts, his mind replaying every time he had swallowed his truth to keep the peace. By evening, back in their small Brooklyn apartment, the weight pressed harder. Troy stood at the window, watching the city lights, heart hammering with the knowledge that silence had saved him today, but might cost him Alexander tomorrow. He replayed the park scene again and again, the jeers, the pointed fingers, the way his body had chosen flight without asking his heart. Was this strength or just another cage he had built himself? The question burned through the night as he lay beside Alexander, wide awake, feeling the distance grow even while their bodies touched. Tomorrow would bring work, the same careful mask, the same fear. But tonight the mockery had cracked something open, and Troy wondered how long he could keep the pieces from falling apart completely. Morning light sliced through the blinds like accusation, and Troy woke to the same knot in his chest that had kept him awake until dawn. Alexander was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen, the clink of coffee mugs sounding louder than usual. Troy sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face, the park scene replaying in brutal clarity. He had chosen silence yesterday, but now the choice felt like a betrayal he could not undo. Morning, Alexander said from the doorway, voice neutral but eyes heavy with yesterday's hurt. Troy stood, crossing the room, wanting to pull him close, yet afraid the touch would expose everything he was still hiding. I keep thinking about those guys, he admitted, voice slow. Not what they said, but what I didn't say. It's like every time I stay quiet, I'm letting my father win all over again. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Alexander set the mugs down, stepping closer. Then why do you keep letting him? The question pierced deeper than any taunt in the park. Troy's mind spiraled, memories of Thanksgiving tables where he lied about dating women, the way his mother's eyes begged him to just be normal, the cousin who had been erased for being honest. Because I love them too, Troy whispered, the admission tasting like defeat. And I love you. I'm caught in the middle. Alex. And every day, it tears me in half. They sat at the small table. Coffee growing cold while Troy poured out the years of careful performance, the fake dates in college, the promotions he earned by never rocking the boat, the nights he cried alone after family calls. Alexander listened, hand resting on Troy's knee. But the tension in his shoulders showed how much the silence hurt him too. I'm out at my studio, Alexander said quietly. People know. And the world hasn't ended. But you carry this alone, and it's killing us. Troy nodded, throat tight, feeling the moral weight crush him. Was protecting his family worth losing the one person who saw him completely? Work that day was torture. At the firm, colleagues joked about the weekend. One guy clapping Troy on the back with, "You look like you had a rough night, girl trouble?" Troy, forced to laugh. The lie burning hotter after yesterday. In his office, he stared at blueprints, mind drifting to Alexander's face in the park. The quiet plea for him to stand up. By lunch, he was drowning in guilt. Texting Alexander, "I'm sorry about yesterday," but deleting it before sending. The afternoon dragged. Every meeting a reminder of the career he could lose if the truth slipped out. Driving home, Troy replayed the internal war. Love for Alexander demanded courage. Love for family demanded silence. He parked outside their building, gripping the wheel, whispering to himself, "One day I'll find the line between protecting them and destroying us." Inside, Alexander waited with dinner half made, eyes softer but still searching. They ate in near silence, the unsaid words heavier than any conversation. Later, lying together in the dark, Troy held Alexander close, heart aching with the knowledge that yesterday's silence had planted seeds of doubt that were already growing. He drifted to sleep wondering how much longer his heart could bear the fracture. The phone rang at 7:30 p.m. The caller ID flashing mom, and Troy's pulse spiked like it always did. Alexander was sketching at the table, glancing up with concern as Troy stepped onto the fire escape. Mom." Her voice was warm, too warm, the kind that made lies easier and truth impossible. "How's my boy in the big city?" Troy leaned against the railing, city noise rising below, and felt the old pressure settle on his shoulders like concrete. "Good. Busy with a new project." She chatted about church, about his sister's new baby, about how proud they were of the son who made partner track at 32. Each word drove the knife deeper. Yesterday's park mockery felt trivial compared to this gentle erasure. "You seeing anyone special?" she asked. The question loaded. Troy closed his eyes, Alexander's face flashing behind his lids. No one serious. The lie tasted metallic. Inside, the storm raged harder than ever. How could he tell her the man he loved more than anything was waiting 10 feet away? His father's voice overlapped her gentle tone. "Real men build families the right way." Troy gripped the railing until his knuckles whitened, mind screaming that this was the same silence he had chosen in the park, the same choice that was slowly poisoning his life. When he hung up, Alexander stood in the doorway. "Sketchbook forgotten." "You lied again." The words were soft but carried the weight of every previous call. Troy stepped inside, the apartment suddenly too small. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, Mom. I'm gay and the guy I love just watched me get called a fag in public, and I did nothing." His voice cracked, the internal flood breaking free. Tears he rarely allowed stung his eyes. "I'm terrified. Alex. Terrified they'll cut me off the way they did Cousin Ryan. Terrified I'll lose the only family I have left." Alexander pulled him into an embrace, but Troy felt the distance in the way Alexander's arms tensed. "And what about us? Are we less real than their approval?" The question hung, forcing Troy to confront the moral tangle, loyalty to blood versus loyalty to love. They talked late into the night, Troy's monologues pouring out, flashbacks to childhood baseball games where his father praised his manly swing, the night he first kissed a boy and threw up afterward from guilt, the years of therapy he hid from everyone. Alexander listened, sharing his own scars of being out since college, the freedom and the loneliness that came with it. By midnight, the argument had softened into exhausted closeness, but Troy lay awake feeling the fracture widen. The park incident had been the spark. Family calls were gasoline. He whispered into the dark, "I don't know how to choose without losing everything." Sleep came in fragments, dreams mixing jeering voices with his mother's disappointed sigh. Morning brought no relief, only the knowledge that each day of silence added another crack to the foundation of the life he was trying to build with Alexander. Work deadlines blurred into a haze of coffee and guilt, but Troy could not escape the growing rift at home. Alexander's sketches now filled the living room with sharp, angry lines, figures turning away, hands reaching but never touching. Troy noticed, felt it like a punch every time he walked through the door. "We need to talk," Alexander said one evening, voice steady but eyes betraying the storm inside. Troy set his briefcase down, heart sinking. "I know." They sat on the couch, the same couch where they had once laughed until dawn. Alexander spoke first, words measured yet heavy. "I'm tired of being your secret, Troy. The park showed me how deep it goes. You chose them over us without even hesitating." Troy's chest constricted, the internal war exploding anew. He saw himself in the park again, frozen, protecting the version of himself his family could still love. "It's not choosing them over you," he said, voice breaking. "It's choosing survival for all of us. If I lose my job, we lose this apartment, the life we built. If my parents cut me off, I lose the last thread to my past." The confession tore out of him, how every promotion felt hollow because it rested on a lie. How he scanned every room for threats. How loving Alexander felt like the only honest thing in a world of masks. Alexander stood, pacing, pain etching lines on his face. "And what about my pain? I watch you shrink every time your phone rings. I see you smile at colleagues who would drop you if they knew. Is that the future you want for us?" The question forced Troy into deeper waters, memories surfacing of the one time he had almost come out at a firm party. The panic attack in the bathroom afterward. "I'm scared I'll become nothing to them," he whispered. "And nothing to myself." They argued until voices grew hoarse, accusations flying, tears falling. Alexander revealed his own hidden fear that Troy's silence would eventually make him resent the love they shared. Troy countered with the terror of total isolation. In the quiet that followed, Troy held Alexander's hands, feeling the pulse that reminded him why he fought so hard to keep both worlds. "I'm trying, Alex. Every day I'm trying to find the courage, but doubt gnawed deeper than ever." That night Troy lay awake, replaying every choice, every swallowed word, wondering if silence was slowly killing the very thing it was meant to protect. The emotional weight pressed until breathing hurt, the moral dilemma sharpening into a blade pointed at his own heart. A colleague's casual comment at the water cooler, "Heard you and your roommate were seeing the park last weekend," sent ice through Troy's veins. The man winked, but the implication was clear. Someone had seen. Someone was talking. Troy, forced to laugh, mind racing through escape routes. But inside the panic roared. Back in his office, he closed the door, hands shaking as he called Alexander. "They know something." The conversation was short, tense, Alexander's worry mirroring his own. The rest of the day became a minefield of half smiles and careful words. Troy sat through meetings replaying the park scene, wondering if one of those mocking faces had posted a video, if his carefully constructed life was about to implode. By evening, the internal monologue had become a scream. "How long can I keep pretending? How many more lies before I lose myself completely?" At home, Alexander waited with takeout, but the meal tasted like cardboard. They talked in circles, Troy confessing the colleague's remark, Alexander urging him to consider coming out at work. "It might free you," Alexander said. Troy shook his head, the family pressure crashing over him again. "My dad's health isn't great. One shot could end everything." The dilemma tore at him, Professional integrity versus personal truth. The cost of betrayal if he stayed hidden versus the cost of honesty. Sleep evaded him again. Mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. Fired. Disowned. Alone. The next morning, a new email arrived, an invitation to lead a high-profile project. The kind that could make his career. Troy stared at the screen, feeling the trap close tighter. Accepting meant more years in the closet. Declining meant questions he could not answer. He chose to accept, the decision feeling like another betrayal of Alexander. That night the argument escalated. Voices rising, tears flowing. Troy poured out the depth of his fear. The way society's gaze had shaped him into someone who measured love in secrecy. Alexander's pain was palpable. Yet he stayed, holding Troy through the storm. In the quiet aftermath, Troy whispered, "I don't know who I am without the mask anymore." The emotional intensity left him raw. The internal conflict reaching new heights as he realized silence was no longer just protection. It was slowly erasing the man Alexander had fallen in love with. The video surfaced on a local forum, blurry footage of the park. Troy and Alexander clearly visible. Comments below vicious and mocking. Troy discovered it at launch. Heart stopping as he read the usernames, some from his own neighborhood. Panic clawed up his throat. But he closed the tab, choosing silence once more. Alexander called minutes later, voice shaking. It's everywhere in the artist community. They met at home early, the air thick with dread. Troy's mind raced through damage control. The moral weight crushing. Protect Alexander by staying quiet, or risk everything by responding. I can't let this define us, he said. But the words felt hollow. Flashbacks assaulted him, the park laughter, the family calls, the colleagues' wink, each one amplifying the shame until he could barely breathe. That evening a knock came. One of the original mockers stood at the door. Older brother of a client. Face pale. I saw the video. I didn't know it was you. The young man's apology stumbled out. But Troy said nothing. The internal storm too loud. After the man left, Troy collapsed onto the couch, tears finally breaking free. I stayed silent in the park, and now the silence is screaming back at me. Alexander held him. Their embrace the only anchor. The night brought deeper confessions, Troy admitting how the video made him question every choice. Every time he had hidden to survive. The emotional intensity peaked as he confronted the possibility that his silence had invited more pain, not less. Yet in the quiet hours before dawn, he made a decision. He would help without words, using his legal skills anonymously to support victims of similar harassment. The plan formed in the dark, a silent act that might heal what words could not. Weeks blurred into a fever of hidden work. Troy spent nights drafting pro bono cases for LGBTQ youth, funneling resources through third parties so no one would trace it back to him. The internal battle raged fiercer than ever. Each document signed with a false name felt like both atonement and further deception. Alexander noticed the exhaustion, the late nights, but Troy could not explain without risking the plan. You're pulling away again, Alexander said one night, voice cracking with the accumulated hurt of months. Troy wanted to confess everything. The silent fund he was building. The way helping strangers felt like the only way to save himself. But fear kept the words locked. The moral dilemma reached breaking point when his father called, praising the responsible life Troy led. Troy hung up shaking, the hypocrisy burning like acid. In the bathroom, he stared at his reflection, whispering, "Who am I protecting anymore?" The confrontation with himself was brutal. Tears streaming as he admitted the silence had cost him pieces of his soul. Alexander found him there. And for the first time, Troy let the full weight spill. Every fear, every love, every sacrifice. They held each other through the night, the emotional rawness leaving them both stripped bare. Troy's decision crystallized. The silent action would culminate soon. A final stand that required no public words yet would force the world to see. The intensity of the internal awakening left him trembling. Yet for the first time, hope flickered alongside the pain. The charity gala was crowded, lights glittering off crystal and polished floors. Troy stood at the edge in a tailored suit, Alexander beside him openly for the first time in public. On stage, the organizer announced the anonymous donor who had funded the new support center for hate crime survivors, a seven-figure gift that had changed lives. Troy felt the room shift as his name was quietly linked through the paperwork he had deliberately left traceable at the last moment. The original mockers from the park were there, invited as community volunteers, their faces draining of color when they realized the donor was the man they had ridiculed months ago. One approached, voice barely audible. "We didn't know. We're sorry." Troy met their eyes, saying nothing, the silence now carrying the weight of grace instead of fear. Inside, the storm finally stilled. He had chosen the path that cost him nothing publicly, yet everything privately. His family still did not know. His firm remained unaware. But Alexander stood proud beside him, hand openly in his. The internal monologue that had once been torture now whispered peace. Silence had never been weakness. It had been the quiet forging of strength that needed no applause. Later, walking home through the same park where it all began, Troy turned to Alexander. "I'm not fully out yet, but I'm done hiding us." Alexander's smile was everything. Yet as they reached their door, Troy's heart still carried the scars. He had paid the price of every choice, and the world had bowed not to confrontation but to quiet integrity. Was Troy's choice of calculated silence after the park mockery an act of profound strength that ultimately healed more than any shouted defense ever could? Or was it simply fear wearing the mask of wisdom?